Kia ora everyone, if you want to take your seat, we're just about to get underway.
Tuia, ko rangi nui e tūnei, tuia, ko papatūnuku e takato nei. Ka nui te aroha ki te hunga ki te moe mai rā. Ngā mana e tau nei, tēnā koutou, te mana whenua, tēnā koutou hoki, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Ngāti Rārua, Ngāti Rangi nui oku iwi, ko Miriana Stevens toku ingoa, I whānau au ki Motueka. Nō reira, e te whānau, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome everyone here tonight. It's a bit chilly outside, but no chilly probably from anywhere else in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we just really want to thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Miriana, and I do come from the metropolis of Motueka, so not too far away from here. And I was raised by my grandparents. And I belong to a family, and we're quite a big family of Wakatu Incorporation, because there's 4,000 of us that don't all live in the metropolis of Motueka, but they live all over New Zealand and around the world. Wakatu, we are the custodians of a large estate. Starts here in Mohua in Golden Bay. We push into the Abel Tasman National Park, Motueka, Richmond, Nelson, and then across to the Wairau, across to Marlborough. And I guess for us, we don't see any territorial boundaries. We just see a place that we absolutely love. And our 500-year intergenerational vision means that we're not going anywhere. And I guess this place is also very special to us, and I often think of one of our tupuna, one of our ancestors, Tāmati Pirimona Marino, who lived here many years ago and who is also buried here. And he was an entrepreneur, but he was also a humanitarian, and where he looked after the people that came in here to the district. And of course, when you have that ancestry, and we had our board planning here in 2018 in Collingwood, and we went up to the Urupā to see him, and then we also remembered that Collingwood was also going to be the capital of New Zealand. We started to dream big. In Wakatu, our families, we started to think, actually, what might happen if we started to convene the conversations for a regional strategy here into Tauihu. And it was really thinking about the wellness of our people and our communities, as well as the wellness of our whenua, of our land and our water. We know that we're living in times where actually a lot of people are scared, a lot of people are wanting to do better things, especially the conversations that we're hearing around climate change, around waste, and also the fact that there is a lot of our people in our communities that aren't well. So what might be a holistic approach when it comes to forming an intergenerational strategy? So we've got we have lots of big ideas. Our board said, actually, yes, we can convene this. We had discussions with our councils, other businesses, as well as the wider community, and then we applied to the Provincial Growth Fund to help us support us on this particular project. So we're very much gluttons for punishment, but we also decided, actually, let's have a look at intergenerational vision, let's think about a roadmap, and let's think about the priorities that matter most to the people in our communities. So here we are, an ambitious plan that we would like to complete by the end of September. So a strategy, a vision is only really good if we have the people behind us. So hence us coming out, we've started our Te Tauihu talks around the top of the south. We've had one already in Nelson and in Blenheim, discussing kaupapa topics around resilience, around sustainability. Tonight we've got future planning. Next week we've got courageous leadership, and then ambition. Because a lot of the things that we're talking about requires some courage. It requires us to be bold if we're going to make any changes, but it also requires us to do things together. So we're really excited. We have found that people are really receptive in terms of wanting to do better, to make some changes. So we're starting on the journey. Tonight, we have a wonderful panel that has volunteered their time to come and have a talk. We've been really heartened by the crowds that have been coming out, and especially on the live stream. I think Johnny's going to mention something about the broadband, so maybe that's one of the issues we need to discuss tonight. One of the kaupapa. We've got some challenges here, whānau. Yes, I can see some agreement there. So, you know, these are some of the big ideas, or probably they're not actually even a big idea, it's just probably what we need. But let's have the kōrero. So thank you, everyone, and we're really looking forward to tonight and also coming back later in the year. So without further ado, and actually I'll just start our session before Johnny comes up with a karakia, with a prayer. Me I noe tātou. Matua tama wairua tapu me ngāna hera pono. Hei ho mai piki te māramatanga, piki tura, piki te kaha. Ti tātou tinana me tātou wairua, ko te māngai hei tautoko. Āmeni. Kia ora.
E ako nui, e ako rahi, tēnā koutou katoa. E tū ana au, I raro e te maru o parapara. Tū mai, ngā awa, e rere, e rere, e rere. Kamihi ake ki a koutou, I runga I te āhuatanga o tēnei wā. No te tai tokirau tēnei, engari tupu ake au I motueka. Nō reira, me mihi ki te hunga kāinga, ngā iwi taketake o te Tauihu. Kei ngā pai kōrero mō tēnei rangi, kei te mihi atu. Ngā koutou mātou e whakahōnore, koutou anō hoki, ngā koro mātua, ngā rangatira, me ngā kākā wahanui o te hāpori, tēnā koutou. Ka ti, kua whakaraui ka tātou I runga I te karanga o te Tauihu. Te karanga whenua, te karanga moana, te karanga tāngata. Nō reira, ka whakapau kaha ana au I te kaupapa o te Tauihu. Kōrero kei runga, raru kei raro. Mā tātou katoa, te huarahi, tika e whai ana. Mā whero, mā pango, ka oti ai te mahi. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Well, kia ora everyone, and thank you so much for being here tonight. And thank you to everyone who has been involved in making this event happen tonight. We're absolutely stoked to be here in Mohua, Golden Bay, and to be kicking off a process here in Golden Bay of talking with communities here as part of this Te Tauihu intergenerational strategy. My name is Johnny O'Donnell, and I've got the real privilege of facilitating tonight's conversation with our lineup of panellists. So we've got a really full house, which is great, but also, as you're probably aware, we are live streaming tonight's event, and as Miriam has alluded to, we have a live stream running here, but the internet's been a little bit shaky. So we're hoping that it sustains itself, but what you could do, if you like, in terms of helping us spread that, when we engaged in this conversation and started to hold these talks around Te Tauihu, we wanted to make sure that although we're addressing different topics in different locations, that anyone from around the region could be a part of those conversations. And so live streaming is just one way of kind of opening that up and making it more accessible. So if you do have whānau and friends who you think would like to join in on this conversation, then we're running it through our website, which is tauihu.nz, and also our Facebook page. And the name of that is Te Tauihu Intergenerational Strategy. So you're all welcome to share that and participate. The other reason you may want to have a look at that is because we'll also be taking questions through the live stream. So anyone who's participating in the Facebook Live tonight will be able to submit their questions, and in the second half of this evening, all the questions will be from people on the live stream or submitted by you in the audience. If you're struggling with the live stream or you're not on Facebook or anything like that, then just at the back of the room on the cabinet there, we have some post-it notes. And when we go to a break in about 45 minutes, you'll be able to note down your questions and drop them to Libby over in the corner there, and we'll ask them in the second half as well. So really do encourage you. We're having a conversation this evening, but if anything fires for you, anything sparks, and you want to ask our panellists some questions, then you absolutely have the opportunity to do that. I'd also like to acknowledge Sasha Horton for helping us on the ground here in Mōhua. Thank you for pulling everyone together tonight. And also Wendy Andrews. We had a fantastic conversation earlier in the week on Fresh Start, so that was awesome. Thank you, Wendy. So I'm going to go through and introduce our panellists for this evening before we get underway. A couple of them will be no strangers to you. They are Golden Bay locals, but especially for the benefit of people on the live stream, I'd like to go through the introduction. So first of all, Jane Dixon. So Jane was born in Nelson and has lived in the Nelson Tasman region for most of her life. She has lived in Golden Bay for the past 37 years and has 4 generations of her family living in the Bay. For the past 27 years, Jane has Takaka, which has become a community hub providing employment and well-being for locals and visitors in the Bay. She has a keen interest in community, whānau and sustainability and believes that these things are all integral to business success. As part of this, the Muscle Inn supports local arts, music, radio, theatre, sports and schools. Jane has visited and observed communities in a diverse range of countries including Namibia, Solomon Islands and North Korea. Her commitment to the environment began many years ago, and in 1979 she was awarded the New Zealand Young Conservator of the Year by the Ministry of the Environment. The ethos and practice of community building continues to this day. Jane has also been a committee member of the Golden Bay Promotions Association for the past 25 years, including 5 years as chair. So Jane, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Round of applause for Jane Dixon. Thanks, Jane. And next up, we have Lucy Butler. So Lucy is a mum of 2 young kids and executive director of HealthPost, Aotearoa's leading online health and wellness retailer based in Mōhua, Golden Bay. HealthPost was established 30 years ago by Lucy's mum Lindley to empower people to live naturally healthy lives. They remain deeply connected and committed to caring for our local community and our planet for future generations. And thank you, Lucy, for making the time to be here. I know you've got a busy week. So, Lucy Butler. And last but certainly not least, our invited guest today who has travelled over from Nelson, Agnieszka Grudzinska. Agnieszka is contributing to the project as one of our expert advisors, and Agnieszka has an MBA, she's a chartered financial analyst and a member of the Institute of Directors New Zealand. She has over 30 years experience in senior management, consulting, program and project management and governance, with a particular focus on infrastructure spanning transport, water, solid waste and energy across many countries and most continents. Closer to the home, she is a member of the board of NALMAC, is actively involved in the governance of Canoe Salon and New Zealand, and mentors small businesses and non-for-profits through Business Mentors New Zealand. Thank you for being here, Agnieszka, and welcome. Awesome. Right, now that the introductions are done, we're going to kick off. So, as I said, for the first part of this evening, we're going to be having conversations with our panellists and learning a bit more about their views on future planning and leadership right across Te Tauihu and here in Mōhua, Golden Bay. And throughout this process, I really do encourage you to jump on your phones, get on the live stream and ask any questions that are coming up for you during this process, or alternatively, jump up, grab one of those post-it notes and leave that for us. So as soon as we have a break, we'll go through, grab those questions and come back, and the second half will all be structured around your questions. So we are going to start with Lucy tonight. So thank you for being here, Lucy, and I want to start by just giving you the opportunity to talk a little bit about HealthPost and the phenomenal story of HealthPost growing out of the Bay, and a little bit about your sort of philosophy and approach to building and growing this business.
Okay, thanks, John. Great to be here. Thanks, everyone. So HealthPost is probably relatively familiar to most Bay locals, perhaps, but it was started here 30 years ago by my mum, it's in the intro, Lindley, and really kind of grew out of a need and desire for her to make a living. She was looking after 3 young kids on the domestic purposes benefit, as it was called in those days. So that was a very real and very motivating for her, but also dealing with a lot of ill health herself and wanting to support that naturally, but at that point in time, the late 80s, accessing natural products, particularly in regional and rural New Zealand, was really challenging, really expensive, and just not easy to get hold of. Nothing like the availability that it is today. So she started directly ordering in bulk, sharing it out among the local community. So it really was kind of a community genesis, I guess, for that business, and being supported by those relationships within the Golden Bay community at the outset. Of course, that issue around accessibility of natural health was not unique to Golden Bay at all, and so that quickly became evident that those in other regions wanted to access the same kind of service, and it just grew from there as a mail order phone business, which Mum ran with herself with two close friends for many years. And then with the advent of both the expansion of wellness and natural health as a much more mainstream area of interest, and also then with the advent of e-commerce, online shopping, those two things kind of came together and fueled a period of massive growth, really, from early 2000s. So and then my brother and I got involved, and him shortly before, a few years before me, and he's a CEO currently based between Auckland and here. I'm based here, spend a little bit of time in Auckland. We've got an office up there, some of our specialist technical staff, e-commerce and marketing functions based up there, but vast majority of our team are here in Collingwood still, 85 odd folk. Thank you. Yeah, we get it's quite funny in the summer. We get camper vans pulling in just to find out kind of what's happening, like why there are so many people in a cow paddock up the back of Collingwood. So someone just about full time out there telling people that what's going on. So it's a curious thing, I guess, in terms of the region, and given particularly that it is an e-commerce business. We have a small retail store in Auckland, but vast majority of our business is online. So I guess overcoming the various challenges, technical and logistical and things, to make that continue to be not only feasible but something that we're really proud of and feel is really sustainable, and that a lot of those disadvantages or perceived disadvantages have been assets in many ways, and certainly can continue to. I think it's such an interesting time now, in the sense that there's so much about purpose-driven business, and what is your why and how you perceived perhaps limitation of being based in a smaller regional community is also a real advantage, in terms of what you were saying earlier, Johnny, about it being that sense of a shared vision and purpose being much more integral to the kind of DNA of the business, and that's in part due to the kind of connection of the community and the accountability of that too. The fact of when you're operating in a small community with such a strong network of relationships, the repercussions of anything that you do are so immediate. You're constantly called to account, and in a way that I think is really positive, and that's now happening on a much more macro level in terms of consumer expectations, and in a way, I think being embedded in a small, and not just any community either, I think, in fairness to Golden Bay, but a community, as we can see tonight, that is so engaged ethically and in every other respect, and mindful in their consumption, and vocal about what they believe in. So I think that's been really healthy, and will hopefully stand us in good stead in terms of some of these changes now playing out on a bigger scale. So So
you talk about that, and I know that HealthPost is very big on that ethos, and obviously in 30 years a lot's changed in the world, but so many things are remaining steady in terms of the principles and the philosophy and the approach to business. But in that time, it would be fair to say that the expectations of the consumer have been heightened, and the access to tools to kind of demand more from businesses have been created and are now mainstream. What do you see out there? How kind of, I guess, how much faith do you have in that narrative? There's a lot of talk now about businesses doing good, giving back, being more sustainable, having more ethical practices. Do you think businesses are up for that challenge? And are we taking enough action, or is it all just talk at the moment?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think it's something that we, and within, bearing in mind that I'm speaking within the lens of our particular industry, but I think it's, in a way, what you're talking about is kind of writ large in natural health, because there is so much, more so than I think than in some other industries, consumer expectation around, people saying the right things, and the whole phenomenon of greenwashing, and there is a lot of box ticking, I think, that goes on around that sort of thing. There's also, because it's an area where there's been massive, rapid growth, there's also a lot of opportunism in that space. So there's kind of, not only are there all those tropes around what it looks like to be a natural products company that are really easy to churn out again and again, but there's also been a lot of money to be made in that space, particularly manufacturing health products. So, there has been, a real kind of boom of businesses that maybe aren't doing, holding themselves to a high enough account. And I think that's where we as a retailer feel like we're increasingly able to create real value for our customers by just asking some harder questions and really putting some expectations back onto our suppliers that are much more stringent around transparency of supply chain, around ingredients formulation. Why is some of the stuff in your product? Just because your average customer doesn't know what that particular thing is, we know what it is, and we know that doesn't need to be there, and actually it's not great. So why is it there? And it is quite surprising sometimes, the blank stare, or the unanswered email that you get, to those kinds of probings. And it's certainly not across the board, but I think, and I think there are some, so many amazing natural products businesses in New Zealand and beyond who are doing things with a huge amount of integrity. But I think it's really difficult for consumers currently to know the difference, because often it will be those smaller, businesses that don't necessarily know, they don't have the data or the marketing, whatever, to know how they should be presenting themselves to kind of capitalise on the fact that they're actually doing an amazing job and doing things with a whole lot more integrity than others. So I think we're increasingly trying to use, I guess, our leverage to help support those businesses that we feel like are really aligned and caring about the future and doing things better and raising the bar and trying to influence positively where we can some of the other players, but also where that's not happening, just kind of turn away from those relationships a little bit more. So we're getting much more sort of targeted and proactive about the way that we're doing that for the reason that you're raising, is I think it's impossibly difficult currently. And I think this is, in terms of like the overarching thing of what we're talking about, it's like empowering consumer intention to do better, that really genuine willingness to actually, the majority of our customers, if we go out and ask them, tell us that they are mindful in their consumption and they do care about these things, but it's like how, and then we've done these really detailed customer empathy interviews where you go into people's homes, you spend hours with them, you listen to what they're saying, and then you look at what they're buying, and it's like there's a whole lot of disempowered, these intentions are either being deliberately kind of contorted through greenwashing and through capitalising on, the fact that there's a million different names for palm oil or what have you. But also there's not enough business actually supporting people's desire to do better and spend their money in a way that lends, to a better future. So,
So you talk about storytelling there, and obviously there was real intent behind the way this business has been set up, and Golden Bay is a big part of that. So how big a part of your story is being based here? I'm sure it's not without its challenges, but have you seen that as an advantage as well? And do people respond to that?
People do. I mean, one of the main questions that we get asked is whether or not we're a New Zealand company. I don't know if it's as specific as Golden Bay, but there's definitely, if anything, an increasing awareness and desire of people to support New Zealand businesses, and indeed a lot of particularly supplement companies in New Zealand now are owned offshore, so it's a really good thing that people are keyed into that. But Golden Bay story, I think, it is. I mean, it does resonate. It does resonate with people, and I think we're kind of building that out increasingly with, we've had for a number of years a strong kind of charitable donation program, but focusing that increasingly on the local environment, and and so sort of and things that we can get our team involved in a practical way as well, actually getting out and doing stuff rather than it being a little bit abstract. And I don't know. It's hard to say. I know there's a whole lot of, as I spoke to earlier, there's a whole lot of things that are really important to us as a business about being here, and a whole lot of ways that we really feel like that has benefited us, but the extent to which we've translated that to our customers in New Zealand and abroad, I'm not sure. There might be more to be done there.
Sure. So, as part of this, obviously, we look to businesses that we see as synonymous with the region of Te Tauihu, and some, there's a lot of success stories of really innovative companies that speak to the identity of the region, that people are very proud of, that are providing good local opportunities. I guess the question is, you've got a successful model. How do we create lots of health posts? What conditions do we need in the region to do more of this?
Obviously there's the practical stuff, there's the internet stuff that was touched on earlier. That's been massive for us. We're an e-commerce business, very fortunate that we're located next to Collingwood Area School that was picked up in the big, rollout there, and our systems and logistics manager is the chair of the board of trustees of Collingwood Area School. So that's, we've got it's all, and again, relationships. And I think, when you come back to what, thriving in a local community means, it's so much about relationships, really. And I'm sure that's the case with business anywhere. It's just that, again, it's very real and present and close at hand in a small community. Stuff around zoning, council support obviously has been really critical. There were times when it was pretty on the fence whether we'd be able to continue because we simply couldn't find the land that was actually zoned in a way that would enable us to expand when we really, really needed to expand. And if it wasn't for the intervention of a couple of particularly proactive local councillors, that could have been, a deal breaker. We needed the space. So, those kinds of practical things. But I think support, and I think that's where this kind of forum is so awesome, because I think, support of some risk taking, some kind of out of the box thinking. Like I think we are very cautious often, in how we approach these things, and it's like you just can't. And increasingly so. There's no guarantee of success with any of these things. You have to be prepared to. But people would be better supported. I think less a fear of just trying, some of these things, but getting that, getting enough support at that early stage to get things off the ground so they can get their own momentum. I think, Mum she reckons the business would have fallen over if she hadn't had a particularly sympathetic person in the Inland Revenue, 3 or 4 years in, when she just had backed up her taxes, not so much because she couldn't pay them, she didn't have time to do them or didn't know what to do or whatever, but she happened to get someone who was like, oh, well, look, we'll just, made it possible for her to continue. So I think those kinds of structural supports, and that's probably the case all over the country, but I think, when you're not coming from the business community, and Mum most certainly was not coming from the business community, you don't have the confidence to navigate those things. So those are really instances of luck, encountering. There's no way she would have had the confidence to navigate those kinds of challenges in those early years. without some decent support. So, and I think that is probably a real constraint in the regions as well. And, you know, I mean, we have a base in Auckland. I go up there fairly often, and we go to, you know, events hosted by Deloitte, and, you know, it's like the culture, like it's so having, I mean, I was born and raised in Golden Bay and have lived elsewhere, but, you know, my only experience of running a business is here in Golden Bay. And then you go to some of these events and urban centres, and it's like, holy shit, you know, this is the culture of business confidence. This is where people think nothing of taking risks and think nothing of, you know, so because they just, it's like it's in their blood, you know. And I just feel like there's such a that level of confidence. Like, how do you get that? How do you support that and foster that? Because in a rural community where it's not just, you know, and there's not this people don't have the massive backstop either. And again, Mum certainly didn't, you know. So again, it's like it's a bigger risk when you're gonna really if it falls over, it's really gonna fall over. You know, you don't have a whole lot of money behind you that is making that a safer proposition. So, yeah, I think there's some real constraints like that, again, no easy solution for, but I think having these kinds of conversations is an awesome place to start.
Awesome. Great, thanks, Lucy, and we'll come back to you. And again, if anything from Lucy's story has resonated, or you've got questions for her, or anything relating to the things that we've been talking about, then please do jump on the live stream and ask those questions. We're going to move on now to Agnieszka. Thank you for making the very long trip from Nelson over to the Bay. So Agnieszka, it's been a real pleasure getting to know you as part of this project and learn more about your work, and you've had some fantastic insights already. I want to first hone in on, you talk a lot about effective governance and leadership. So what do you think that means in a Te Tauihu context?
Well, that's to be here, and it's such a pleasure to come here, other than for my absolute favorite pursuits, seeing regularly what I believe is the most beautiful beach in New Zealand. I often make the pilgrimage here. This is the first time I'm coming for a different reason, and it's quite special. So, governance, that's a big question. Thank you for that. I'll try not to get too carried away. I think really for me, governance is all about the right questions. The questions that do not lead into micromanagement. The questions that don't jump over all of the necessary specialist or technical input all the way to the final product. I really quite like what you said, you know, community is often reacting quite badly to the idea of consultations because they feel that, you know, it's kind of a finite product. Things have been, lots of resources have been spent on it. They are only to approve it or not. And it's kind of late to engage in it. So at the same time, it's very difficult to just throw out questions to which there are, in our increasingly complicated lives, no easy answers. You know, it's sort of like if our, it's a stupid example, excuse me, but, you know, if somebody were to ask me what kind of operating system would I like on any of my electronics, I would be quite stumped. That's not the question that I would like to be asked. And similarly, when we talk about infrastructure, very often it's not, you know, do we put in this kind of sewage plant here or there? Do we put, you know, a specific, you know, roundabout here or there? We need to be asked questions that we can relate to, questions that make it all relevant to us. So questions that pose, that as a point of reference tell us what does it aim to achieve for us? Is it to avoid certain risks? Is it to make our lives easier? And of course, roughly, what are the alternatives and the price tag associated with it? And very often you need that kind of feedback early on. Then the specialists can go on and do their feasibility studies. That's effective governance to me. And another very important thing about effective governance is related to the courage that you mentioned, that was mentioned over and over again. The courage not to take too many things as given, not to accept sacred cows. I grew up behind the Iron Curtain. I strongly believe in the power of market. But it's a tool. It's one of the most important inventions of humanity, more important than the fire. But there's no need to worship it. It's a tool. It doesn't always achieve what we aim to achieve. And there's no reason to make it into a sacred object of idolation. And in that context, I think that to make it all a little bit more specific, I feel that on infrastructure, we need to find ways of engaging the community early in the projects, asking you all for input, like what are the most important criteria? Is it, for instance, avoiding risk, making you safer, the infrastructure more resilient, or perhaps it is the emission that we care most about reducing. And there are many other questions that can follow. These are probably nobody will tell us that that only one of these criteria matter. They all matter to us. But depending on which one is the overriding one, the first one, that will dictate the route we pursue. And obviously, feasibility studies are expensive. We can't study everything. We need to hear from the community what the criteria are. Then we will look at the solutions. And finally, and we are growing, we are living in increasingly complex times. The information that's available to us is overwhelming. There is so much out there, but it's not always relevant. And this is where the role of initiatives like this, or the various authorities that we trust, whether it is our councils or community organizations, nonprofits, or respected businesses, leaders, they come on here. Then we absolutely need those type of trusted guidance these days, because we can't make sense of all of the information out there. So collecting the right data, but putting it in case studies, in illustrations, things that people can relate to see what are the options that we can pursue in infrastructure is essential, because you can't make sense of the data otherwise. So I think that the last thing I would like to say is that we absolutely have a task to bust an important myth, which is that infrastructure is the responsibility of others. That it's really something the council does, that the central government does, and well, we can just call them to account how it affects directly us as the consumers of that infrastructure. The reality is we find it too expensive to provide it all for ourselves. We have delegated that, partially to the council, partially to the central government, but we are still the ones driving this primarily as the consumers of it. It is perhaps the greatest weight behind our footprint as people on our environment, on our region. And we cannot just take a step back and say, this is all about provisions. This is about consumption as well, about our demand patterns.
Interesting. So, you think about effective governance and decision making and that delegation around infrastructure. I know it's a very topical issue here in the Bay, and particularly around dependence on key infrastructure and community input into those decisions. And nothing drove that home more than the closure of Takaka Hill, I'm sure. So, what's your view then, in your opinion, on the state of our infrastructure across Te Tauihu?
Well, it's a hard one to answer because, how do you assess a state? You always assess a state in comparison to something. So in that sense, I don't know that we can put it all in one basket. We can look, there are some parts that we are happier with today and others that we are not. There are some differences between Tasman and Nelson and Marlborough. But the reality is that the way that we look at it is a little bit more, there's a bit of the vernacular of the lead and lag indicators of those of you that have been brought into the health and safety push in New Zealand. There is this recognition that the lag indicators, which record the incidents of things really bad happening, are not as useful as the lead ones. And the example being things really badly going bad, that is too late to assess what is the current state of affairs. There are many changing parameters that affect infrastructure today. So all of you will have an opinion on how well the infrastructure of today serves you. What I'm finding particularly useful in this dialogue is that we actually take a look at the future. So there's this great term used in New Zealand, and I find it very useful. It's called fit for purpose. Yes, it's a very good term because you don't want perfection, you don't want things undersized, but you don't want them oversized. It just fit for its purpose. But purpose today or purpose tomorrow? Infrastructure has a long time span associated with it. And is it fit for our children and grandchildren? I think we all intuitively have an answer to that question. I won't attempt to state the obvious. I think that where we find the biggest weakness, and we had an interesting conversation before this, is the fact that the change, which is obvious in technology but also in our environment, is so fast that our institutions are not changing fast enough with it. And that is quite painfully the case in infrastructure, which we have set up quite inflexible division of labor. Councils take care of waters, at least for now, and energy is partially divided between the line companies as responsibility, but then there are the Transpower. Without it, none of this works for our region. We don't actually generate the power here, it's generated somewhere else. And transport is split quite in the middle. Some is responsibility of the local council, some of it is New Zealand Transport Agency. It's quite interesting how those divisions sometimes work at cross purposes. But even when we collaborate and decide across territorial authorities to, like Tasman and Nelson has undertaken a few joint projects, we often create quite an inflexible box around that one particular undertaking and make it quite rigid. So those models are not that useful when there's big change. Sometimes it's, when you make things, divide labor and make things inflexible, sometimes it speeds up your effectiveness, for the time being. but it doesn't make you more resilient, doesn't make you able to respond to change. So this is the issue in infrastructure we have, to change the models that we currently have in place, biggest issue. And again, being just very specific, we do have a spike of infrastructure spending in the region as a whole. Tasman, Nelson, Marlborough, it's true for all three. And in itself, they have different priorities or different particular issues for the moment, but the life cycle of infrastructure in New Zealand is such that a lot of it is coming around. You know, things are good for about 50 years. You know, we are some part into the cycle. When it was put in place, the arrangements were quite different. Are we going to be able to deal under the new arrangements with the coming up big renewal expense? And that is true for waters, that is true for some parts of transport, such as like bridges, which are kind of all of a sudden, many of them are going to need rejuvenation. So that brings us to issues of financing, and you have probably heard some of that discussions. A lot of councils say, well, you know, we really do not have the resources, particularly under the change that is coming our way, climatic change, you know, environmental change. The other thing is just very practical, that we all know, you know, a lot of the housing, intractable housing crisis is around the capacity to deliver. So, you know, with a lot of the councils all of a sudden needing to put through big projects, like in our region, you know, we have limited contracting capacity. All of a sudden the costs start shooting up. You know, you're vying for the same people. And the construction firms or the contractors find it hard to find the staff. So it's not that they are necessarily bidding up the price, but they are desperately trying to bring in and sometimes keep poaching staff among themselves, you know, a bit of a musical chair going on there. And that raises the cost. So in summary, I'd say institutions and just dealing with the fact that we have limited resources, human resources, financial resources in the region for dealing with a natural life cycle of our infrastructure, but also from the change that is coming due to climate change.
Excellent. You know, you've touched on it, but obviously there's an increasing awareness around the impact of climate change at the moment, and the urgency of that. And we note that in Nelson, the council has made the decision to declare that climate emergency. We haven't had that in Tasman yet, but what impact do you think that climate change will have on our current infrastructure set? What does that actually look like, and how resilient are we against that at the moment?
Well, resilient. And for climate change, we are not. No. There's more to resilience than climate change. You know, I mean, there are some other elements that would probably be worth looking at. But for climate change, I mean, the biggest way that it's going to impact us in the near future is through water, fresh water. You know, we are dealing with abundance of water. We are dealing with shortage of water. We're dealing with the pollution that comes through the abundance of water, and sometimes through the shortage of water, because the way that rivers are affected if the flow isn't high enough. And we're dealing with the destruction which spans the various infrastructure sectors. So abundant water wrecks our transport and our built environment, our houses, our common spaces, etc., etc. So that is the most immediate threat. We have not really satisfactorily made ourselves resilient to that. But we will also have to be realistic in what level of resilience is affordable. And in some cases, it's particularly affordable in the current modus operandi, so there's limits to how much we can spend on new pipes, bigger diameter. I mean, it used to be that there were certain regions that were affected by water scarcity and others that were affected by abundance. Now we have it both, all of us. And what it means that infrastructure has to be sized impossibly wide. It has to, the traditional infrastructure, the gray infrastructure of pipes, we have to have big pipes just for that event that could happen tomorrow. I mean, those events have labels, one in 15 year, one in 100 year, one in a 50 year. But the problem is that's based on history. And every day that history is being reassessed. It's not necessarily a prediction of future. So we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, but generally a huge push to, to avoid or to be fully resilient, we would have to spend incredible amounts. So perhaps it's time to think in different ways, and we started those conversations about, perhaps going towards more modular approaches, smaller, but engaging consumer into it, engaging communities. There are a lot of things being tested around the world that involve what is more generically, labeled as distributive infrastructure, which is, more commonly associated with electricity. We all know that, microgrids, solar, we feed it on, we, get paid, we pay, and so, etc. That's called distributive. But similarly, in water, there has been a lot of similar approaches. In some cases, it involved in going with landowners and discussing various use of land, basically mixing the green with gray approach, if you wish, taking some of the quite well-tested and well-known old green technologies, which have been around for a while, but they were often done in separation from the gray, the regular pipes. Now they are being optimized because we have much more sophisticated data collection and smart systems that allow us to actually try to integrate it. So we approach our urban water as a continuum with the rural use. We look at catchments and span climatic and weather predictions with the modeling tools that the urban water engineers use. That's just a little bit of a segue, but I think we cannot omit some other aspects of resiliency if we are really serious that is a priority for the community. There are other threats. We have a lot of quite centralized system. We have heard and experienced in our own life the threat from cyber attacks. Those are very real threats that could affect, like a central grid. There is also a real threat to New Zealand and to our community from any disruptions in the world trade and in the world order, because we are highly dependent on export and import and on the world markets. So, when we talk about resilience, it's not just, those are all linked. We realize that some of the threats to the world order are being driven by climatic emergency, but it's all part and parcel, and those threats to us may be just as huge as the fact that the waters may take away our roads, as we all painfully experienced here.
Right, thanks, Agnieszka. And I think, if anything, there's a talking broadly about resilience and the impact of climate change on infrastructure, but I know people are very connected to those issues here, and if there's something specific that's coming up for you around transport or water, I'm going to go to handheld, I think. If anything specific's coming up for you around transport or water or any environmental issues regarding that, then please do note those questions down, because we'll get to them in the next part. So we're going to move on to Jane now, and thank you for being with us, Jane, and thank you also for introducing me to pickled eggs. Yeah, one of the best discoveries of the last year, actually. And I'm always envious of the mussel and wish we had something similar in Motueka. Focusing now on the sort of wider region and some of the big issues facing us, I guess I want to ask you, what are the big issues right now and the challenges that we've got that you're thinking about, that are concerning you?
I guess housing is a major one for me. It's just the traditional housing model seems to not really be working for our communities, and for one thing, as an employer, we pay fair wages, I think, but we don't pay lawyers' wages, or so we're quite a low-wage employment, and for our people to be able to afford to live in housing and to purchase a house, even. And then I guess a problem of a holiday destination is that a lot of people let their houses out over the summer, a lot of people let their houses out on Airbnb, and there's a lot of houses sitting empty for a lot of the year. And to have a thriving community, we really need young folk in the community. We need kids for the schools, and we need people who are living here to be part of the fire brigade and those sort of volunteer organisations that actually hold the community together. And I think that a lot of the housing there's a lot of big houses being built. A lot of us would rather live in quite small houses, maybe in clusters. And I think we seem to be, as others have alluded to, the regulations are behind where the community is at with what we want. And thank you. Yeah. So I've had my mother living with us, so caring for her, and I've also got a son and grandchildren living nearby. And it's really important to me to be able to all live together and live well, and we're not all living in one house, but just to be able to care for each other easily is really important, and then for everybody to be able to sort of do that.
So it's a really interesting point to pick up on. So you think about living intergenerationally, and it's a short period of time in the scheme of things, but we've kind of lost that in many respects, and segregated out age groups in terms of living environments and retirement homes and the likes of. Broadly speaking, in our politics and our communities, do you think we're losing that sense of kindness and connection across generations?
Yeah, I really do. I think, the proliferation of old-aged care homes is sort of a worry. I mean, it's really great that we have got facilities for people, but it's nice to be able to care for people in our community. I'm eternally grateful for our facility here that we have attached with the healthcare, the health centre, where for people who have are less able can go and live there as well. So I feel that's all part of the community. But just being in Wellington recently, up the road from our son's place who lives there, there's this massive, great, looks like a hotel, but it's an old age people's place. And I was just like, oh. I'm not sure that that's quite the right way to do it. Yeah.
So really interesting. So then focusing on businesses now, because I know you've got really strong philosophies at the Muscle Inn around businesses' responsibility in terms of sustainability and wellness of the communities.
What do you see as kind of the needle movers, I guess, in terms of advice back to businesses or a challenge back to businesses on ways they can do better at lifting communities and being more sustainable?
I think that every little bit counts. So we employ a wide age range, from school kids being their first job to people who are nearly retirement age. And I think that, and so then we support the schools financially, and then we give a venue for people to come and play music, so the kids come and high school bands can come and play music and in a real situation. And I think that you just have to keep being engaged with the community and support the people you work with and the community. And then quite a few of our guys play football, so we donate to the football club and support them as well. And I think just keep looking after them, and they're all part of the community, and it all just goes together.
So I guess the question that I think a lot of people are asking in business at the moment is if those expectations have changed and people do want to marry up those desires, I guess, around reducing our footprint, being more sustainable, contributing to the community, whilst also, of course, being financially successful, and that's important for businesses. You're doing it. So what advice do you have around bringing together those goals and making them all work?
I guess it depends what your baseline is. We lived in the community for 10 years before we started the Michelin, and we knew it was a place we wanted to keep living. And as Lucy said too, when you've got a business in a small community, you're answerable to everything and everyone. You can't, I guess, be a bad employer and expect to keep operating, because no one will want to work for you, or if you make bad products, then word gets out. And so I think I can see that it would be easy in a way to be in a big town and you could sort of be ruthless, but I think if you want the longevity, then having integrity and doing what you really want to do. And again, I can see that Lindley had a need and a passion and a desire for starting the health products company, because she needed them for herself and she could see her friends needed them, and our business was the same sort of thing. And so I guess do something with your heart and something that makes you happy and something that hopefully makes a whole lot more people happy as well.
Awesome. Thinking, across, we're thinking about Te Tauihu here, but in the context of us being part of New Zealand and a part of, global citizens with some big issues on the table, what's your sense about, are we having an honest enough conversation about some of those challenges?
Yeah, we're starting to. It's quite hard in the isolation of Golden Bay when a lot of people you talk to are on the same page, and it feels as though you really are getting somewhere, gaining some traction. But even just going across on the ferry to Wellington the other day, you've got to have a disposable cup. I mean, you can take your own, obviously, but they only serve them in a disposable cup with a lid now, because in case it spills. And, I remember going over on the ferry many times as a child, and you got a china cup. And I don't know why we can't do that anymore, And so, I sort of think in our community it can feel as though we're doing quite well, but then you go further afield and you just wonder what's going on.
It's been kind of a theme in the project, so there's a lot about kind of thinking globally and acting locally, but then also people have been talking a lot about personal choice, and I guess this is a question that so many of us are grappling with at the moment, is the movement around sustainability and making better personal choices seems well and truly in motion, but we're coming up against this huge these massive, overwhelming issues. And do you ever have those moments where, in the face of climate change and things, you think, "What am I doing with my keep cup?" In the context. And I guess it's a question for you to say, how do we? Is individual choice enough? And what conditions do you think will need to change, or what kind of leadership do we need to move the bigger picture forward?
Well, I think if we keep setting the example, and for our business, I believe it is a sustainable business, in that we've got community support, and if we don't have the tourism, things would change, but we would still keep going. And I think, believing in yourselves, and if people from away can look at us in Golden Bay and say, well, this is going quite well, or they can look at my business and say, well, that's going well, then that's a good thing. I see recently, or this week, that Air New Zealand said that they're dropping a whole lot of single-use items in their flights, and I know that they're a huge user of fossil fuels, so obviously they've got to balance that somehow. But when a high-profile company like that is putting it out there, and Air New Zealand also supports stock quite largely, and has big advertisements and things for that, I think if people can see, high-profile and successful businesses taking steps, well, hopefully things will just become normalised. And I know it all takes a long time, but hopefully.
Awesome. All right, so plenty to think about there. I think what we'll do is we'll take a quick break, and it will have to be reasonably brief, but a good chance to recharge your glasses. And more importantly for us is we'd really like to get some of your questions. So behind our sound desk over here is Libby, and she is gathering up the questions from the live stream at the moment. We have post-it notes on the cabinet there. If you'd like to, please, you're welcome to put your name in too if you'd like me to address it from you personally. But please do leave the questions and let us know the kind of things you'd like to discuss in the second half, because all of the questions in the second half will come from you. So let's have a break, recharge the glasses, and then come back and carry on the conversation. Thanks.
talk in other regions as well?
Nelson and Blenheim so far, Richmond, Motueka. All right, kia ora everyone. Please take a seat. We've got a lot to get through. Oh. How's got everyone going? It's all right? All right. All right. Cool. Thanks, everyone, and really appreciate all of your questions. I can already tell you we've got more than we'll be able to get through tonight. So the most important thing to let you know is in that regard, the purpose of tonight is to bring some new insight and thinking from the panel. And a big thanks to the three of you for giving up your time and coming along and talking with us tonight. We've got quite a lot of questions from the live stream and quite a lot from the audience as well. What we've been doing is transferring some of the questions that we don't get through on the live stream, for example, taking them to the next events and asking different panels as well, so helping shape that first part of the conversation. And also there's going to be a community hui here held in Mohu as well, so we make sure we get those details circulated, and by registering for tonight you'll get the notification about that. And that is not a panel discussion, so it's an opportunity just for community to come along and just have their say, speak their voice, and have the project listen, basically. So I'll try and get through as many as I can because there's some really, really good questions in here. So I'm going to start with something that's around the kind of wider conversation rather than something more specifically. And the question is, can this conversation get more radical? We aren't going to solve the deepest problems with business as usual. How can we give power back to the people, protect nature, because we have no planet B?
Yeah.
Who would like to take that one on?
Well, I'll make a start because I think that some of the things we've done at the Muslin are quite radical, and though they're kind of normal for us because it's what we believe in. For instance, having composting toilets at a cafe is not that normal. And and then having a kitchen garden and an orchard and making your own beer. A lot of the things that we do that we take for granted and are really happy for everyone to take for granted are not actually that normal. And so I think just, go for it. And
Yeah, no, I
Liz?
completely agree in terms of the need for more courage and risk-taking, you know, and again, you do what you can within the sphere of your own influence. I think as you were saying, Jane, you know, none of us can come up here and say that we've got all the answers in terms of, you know, these massive overarching problems, but, you know, say an example from our own business practice of last year going through our product range and deleting a bunch of products that a lot of products that cost us a lot of money because they were popular products. We also annoyed a lot of customers. They were popular products. People liked buying these products from us. We annoyed a lot of suppliers who liked us buying the products from them. You know, so that's a really, you know, that involved quite a lot of guts. That our natural health expert, the naturopath who headed up that project, was quaking in her boots. You know, she had our full endorsement and support, but she was like, "You guys sure you want to do this? Like, are you really sure you want to do this? Because I don't want to be responsible for." You know, like, no, we definitely want to do it. We also upset some of our team because they liked buying those products. Plus, they had to deal with the fallout if they were in procurement from the suppliers, if they were on the contact centre from customers who weren't happy about no longer being able to get those products. Not only no longer being able to get them, but also being told, you know, well, they weren't maybe as amazing as they could have been in the first place. So as a business, you're making yourself really vulnerable when you do that. Nobody was really aware there was a problem. It's much easier to keep quiet about something like that. And we weren't quite sure when it all washed down what, you know, the impacts for our business would be when you were going to lose X, you know, sales value. But in terms of the positive benefits, those things are harder to quantify. But this was about a year ago, and what we've found is the positive benefits of that have been incredible. Like even team members who don't share those exact same values around, you know, particular chemicals or what have you, they, you know, when we had our 30th birthday celebrations at the end of last year, the thing that the team was most proud of was that piece of work. And what they were proud of was not necessarily the specifics of removing X, Y, and Z, you know, less desirable ingredient from natural products. What they were proud of was working for a business that was prepared to put something other than profit first and was prepared to be bold and to have some courage around these things. And I think we found the same thing within the industry as well. Thank you. You know, where those suppliers and business partners who were saying to us, "What are you doing?" quite affronted, are now coming to us and saying, "Oh, we're formulating a new product, you know, could you tell us what you think?" Or, you know, "Are we reformulating this so that you'll sell it again?" Or, you know, asking us to present on our values and our way of doing business at industry forums. And it's like, you know, you without that initial kind of going, "Okay, we don't know if this is going to work, but this is what we believe in." And actually the biggest risk is continuing to do things the way we've always done them. Like that's true for everyone, for all of us. You know, that's the real risk. The risk isn't really, you know, trying other stuff to see if it works or not. The risk is just going on, doing what we've been doing forever and hoping that it keeps working when we know it's not going to.
Great point. And so thinking about kind of consumer-led and business-driven innovation, but obviously there's some questions in here, a number of questions actually that relate to more or less the same thing. So I'll do my best to represent them, and apologies if I butcher them for you. But there's a lot of conversation about individual choice tonight and consumer-driven innovation and leaning, you know, we've got two examples on the panel of businesses that represent the types of things we want to see in business, but we can't rely on all businesses to do that. And we know that a lot don't. And so the question for the panel is, what role does council, government and our wider leadership involved in delivering constraints, I guess? And at what point, given the question here is climate change will mean staying the same as impossible, so getting above consumer choice for a moment, what role do you think constraints and legislation need to play in driving that change right now?
Well, I think that when you bring in council, you know, central government into it, the most important thing that we can demand and ask for from them is to give us information. So if we're talking about change in our habits, you know, a good example is recycling. The recycling in the region was really put in place in response to the demand of consumers, which saw recycling being carried out in other countries that they visited. Well, we preferred not to think about where that recycling is going and is it actually landing in the landfill at great cost to us as taxpayers, but a great good feel sense of doing your part. So this is where the danger is, that we have a lot of commitment, a lot of energy, a lot of focus, but it could be misspent. We need the information where we can get the greatest impact in reducing our footprints. We need to be told, because life is complex. We don't always know which of our changes would have the greatest impact. So we need to demand those answers. That's one. The other thing, we are not just individuals. As collective, we come together and we're contracting services, or we putting through our government's various policies, etc. Again, we need to have a discussion. How do we steer the people that we elect, the people that answer to us at the local or central level? How do you give them a steer? Lost. Yeah, no, it's back. How do we give them a steer of what are the things we care about? What are our top priorities? And what is the quid pro quo? Because a lot of it is, let's face it, we like to talk about recycling. It makes our life a little bit inconvenient. It is much harder talking about ride sharing, for example, giving up, autonomy, privacy, So, we have to be courageous within ourselves. We have to be courageous in asking the questions that matter and not engaging in actions that come the easiest to us and just leave us feeling kind of good.
Awesome. Okay, changing gears a little bit. So there's a number of questions here around technology, and obviously, we're holding a series of conversations across with different panels, and so there's specific questions in here regarding 5G, so I'll ask one of these questions, but just kind of in fairness to the panel, I don't think any of them have come with an expertise around 5G, so I didn't want to ignore the questions because people are asking them, but there is one in here that I think does a very good job of capturing the kind of wider mood, I guess, that these questions are leaning towards, which is, do you think humankind is not being wise in its use of technology, and that by decreasing the amount of computerized technology we use and spending more time in nature and doing practices such as yoga to connect to our higher energy would fix a lot of the problems that we have? Anyone want to pick up on that?
I certainly feel strongly that anything that we do should ideally hit a few goals at the same time. So we have technology that will enable us to reduce our footprint. We should also use it to regain some of the face-to-face quality time that we have lost in its mindless application. So again, you can use technology to isolate yourself, or you can use technology to find a partner for ride sharing and spend the time happily chatting while going over the hill. It's all how we use it.
Yeah. I find, doing email as a small example, I can go out to my batch and spend a couple of days out there, and I can keep up with work and have the relaxation time at the beach. Whereas if I didn't have that technology, I would have to stay at work. So I feel as though I can use it to be in nature to some extent, as well as, keeping me in the office. Yeah, so I think, we just have to be clever with how we use it.
Awesome. Okay, and something that I'd like to address this question directly to Agnieszka, if that's okay, because I know you have some expertise and experience in this area. So the question is, dairy farming, can it be sustainable in the context of climate change?
Dairy farming, I wasn't aware of having expertise. Well, the only thing that I can say about this is that there is a a great awareness of the fact that we need to bust through traditional silos. And part of it is about our land use. So a lot is now being done in that sphere all around the world, in most unlikely countries. You know, it's not just Europe experimenting, it's China, it's, countries in South America. You know, there is an awful lot going into, for instance, mixed use of land. So there is innovations that span, for example, just contracting models. There are municipalities that sign contract with farmers about how to use their fields as overflow so that their urban water, stormwater systems can work in tandem with natural fields collecting the water in a 50-year event or whatever big event that we don't want to keep sizing our pipes for. There is endless possibilities in putting some infrastructure, say energy generation, on forestry lands or on agricultural lands. You know, an example is wind is particularly, any wind generation, it makes sense. But you can also have payments for ecosystem services, such as maintaining the crucial forestry cover on ridges, which contributes to keeping moisture in the air and regulates your climatic impact. So there's any number. I can't speak to dairy per se, but I think we certainly can and should do much more in that area of getting our councils to talk to the landowners, to talk to farmers, to talk to forestry, and we can achieve so much more in lessening our footprint.
And if we can stick with that line of thinking, so there are a number of questions directed at you, Agnieszka, actually, interesting, around infrastructure, obviously a big issue at the moment. So this question is specifically around, I guess, resilience in the case of a crisis. So how does infrastructure survive in an event when it's becoming very clear that insurance companies and banks will be the first out the door?
Well, that's a terrific question. Because I do feel that we cannot avoid risk. And some of the talks about resilience, we've had some interesting conversation in the workshop in Blenheim. What does resilience mean to people? And for some people, it just means making sure that I can drive on the road, get my water, have my house protected. To others, it means that the life as I know it has a chance of being sustainable, that it can last for my children, for our grandchildren. And that is resilience to them. Now, depending on how you understand that, you have different approaches to what you do. And I think we will be kidding ourselves if we say that our current environment prices everything, including risk, accurately. I mean, look what happened to the insurance industry after the Christchurch earthquake. I mean, a totally predictable event, something that, with the legions of actuaries, and they should have fully priced and not even blinked. But it's affecting, actually, its worldwide industry. So when we are looking at that, what about somebody was quite keen to talk about cybersecurity, is that priced in? What is the distortions that we have inherited in our markets? Why is the price of land so we had a fascinating chat here. Why is the price of land so high in New Zealand in comparison to other countries, which have a much greater shortage of it, and where actually the productivity of that land is much greater? So, that some of it might be just an inheritance, I mean, we used money behind the Iron Curtain. But believe me, it was very notional. And, you know, these relationships between values were set and distorted endlessly. But the markets distort them as well. Some starting points are not. People keep saying, well, you know, I mean, we're so proud of it that we're not providing any subsidies in many areas. And I think that's good. That's part of our resilience to some degree. But it's only good if there hasn't been some distortions put into the place to start with. There are distortions put into the place of our various transport systems, huge distortions. There are distortions in energy, you know. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, the huge, you know, renewables thing was done under a completely different scheme of things. Central government mindlessly, at that time, it seemed, putting money and basically saying, well, we have a great team of dam builders and we're going to keep them occupied and let's build lots and lots of dams. And now we're actually, you know, it's a pet peeve. I mean, it's not a renewable resource, but it's emission-free, it's clean. And we are cutting the coupons of those decisions. But they weren't market-driven. So now say the fact, okay, we have the greatest wind resource in the world, apparently, but we are using very little of it because we're the only country where this isn't being subsidized. Again, good, no subsidies. Bad if there are distortions. And if we are not pricing the emissions, if we're not pricing the fact that there is no push for electrifying our economy. So if we are still using an awful lot of fossil fuels to run New Zealand, basically, we're both dependent, we're definitely not resilient, and ideally, maybe we could, you know, if we had the power, we would tweak it at source. If the cost of oil was high, then we would automatically take care of everything without distortions. But it's not. Do we just stand here and say, well, we don't want to put distortions in? Or do we try to find perhaps not the shortest and cleanest route, but by putting a subsidy here, a subsidy there, an inducement here, an inducement there, just to account for the fact that the fossil fuels are not taking into account the cost. The reason they are so cheap is because the cost that we are all bearing is not factored into the equation. It's a major underlying distortion. Yeah.
And you know, along similar lines, I think as well, there's a question here around, specifically, I want all councils in the top of the south to adopt the same resource management plan for water that Southern, Waikato and Manawatu have. This would be one way of introducing necessary, more stringent water management. So if anyone would like to address that. And I guess there's a bit of a theme running through a lot of these questions, which is more broadly, how do we connect our decision-making, planning and legislation to our natural resources as well?
And I think the key is, again, which should be a natural, I mean, it's an instinctive thing that most Kiwis have, waste not. I mean, waste not water, not just because it's scarce, but, you know, the water is actually fossil, you know, to some degree. I mean, we expend energy on producing it if it comes out of your tap. If there is less usage of it, or if there is rainwater harvesting and use for, then it's not being pumped, it's not being treated. So same thing with solid waste, you know, we're quite mindful of the fact that we need to go towards more circular economy, where we reuse resources. And it is the same with our consumption of infrastructure. So again, pet subject, we somehow need to lower our emission through transport and transport of individuals. That is probably the lowest hanging fruit for New Zealand to in this region. There are many ways of trying to address that, but it's not necessarily just saying, oh, we should have public transport. I think that's just a cop-out. We can't afford traditional public transport in areas which don't have the density. Similarly, there's many other things we can't afford in areas that don't have the density. But there are many imaginative ways around it that have been tried and tested. And as long as we are clear on the objectives, we can come up with some ideas, vet it with the community, and see whether there's appetite in adjusting our habits.
Can I put that question to you, Jane, if you don't mind, as well, around connecting up our decision-making with the natural world? One of the themes that's been running through all of the talks we've had and the strategy conversations is this concept around, the environment has the first right to sustain itself before we do anything else. And I guess the question is, how do we make that a reality right now? Because it's not currently how we're working, is it?
No, it's not. And I don't know, to me it seems as though it should be easy, but I'm not really sure why it's not. And one of my particular concerns at the moment is over the hill in Lower Queen Street, where the subdivision is being done on the seaward side of the road, and it just seems like the maddest thing to me. With potential rising sea level, it's happening, and you can see places where there's inundation that there wasn't. And why is there a subdivision going there? And not even just about the runoff actually into the estuary, but just the sanity of the environment that it's in, and what's going to happen there.
Lucy, any thoughts around that bigger picture in terms of making more sustainable choices for future generations, and how we can kind of adopt that more courageous thinking?
I think there's a massive piece of consumer empowerment that has to happen. Like you mentioned the Keep Cup before, and it's like we sell a lot of metal straws and these kind of things, and that's awesome, and it's incredible to see the uptake, so rapidly around that sort of thing, like the the whole plastic bag issue and all of that. But it's like behind the scenes of every industry, there is massive and flagrant waste. As soon as you start talking to anyone who has that view of a particular industry, this is not translating. What the consumer can't see is not translating into shifts in manufacturing and business practices where they are not visible. So there's got to be a bunch of work done, and I think some of this by government and some of it by by private sector as well, in making it much more possible for people to express their values and how they're spending their money to drive those shifts. Because if you don't see it, you don't know it's there. Nobody wants to change their habits. Nobody wants another problem. They don't want to know that actually this thing that they've purchased, if you looked back through, that supply chain, the kind of level of waste, and even household recycling, in contrast, like if you talk to the people who run the recycling for Auckland City or whatever, it's like, domestic recycling is minuscule, it is industrial waste that is the big, it's not that, like, I think all these things are super significant in themselves, but so much more significant in terms of those changes in consumer desire to use a recyclable straw, or to not have a coffee unless you've got your Keep Cup or whatever it is. That stuff's really important, but it could be so much more powerful if it was kind of fueled by the proper information to translate that decision making into more meaningful action. But that's not. We don't even have transparent labelling on products. Even consumable products like supplements aren't necessarily fully labelled. You don't have to say everything that's in the bottle. So it's like we've got a really long way to go to be unpeeling some of these layers so that people can, and of course nobody wants to or has the time to do an independent research project into every single thing that they spend their money on. So again, and there are some awesome organisations like B Corp is one that springs to mind that help to facilitate this kind of thing. It's gaining a lot of traction overseas, where they do a really thorough audit of a business, all of its practices, its supply chain, its governance, its diversity, of course its environmental impact, all of that sort of thing, and create a shorthand for people to be able to actually see, or have some assurance of what's going on behind the scenes. Because, I think there's such an opportunity now to do that with this great upsurge in people's consciousness and willingness to express their values in that way. But without the right information, it's not near as powerful as it could be.
That's exactly it. I really feel that this is an area where we could make a huge headway in the region. This is an area which really suffers from fragmentation of approaches, and we have such fragmented approach among the three councils. And there's also an area where a lot of things are not apparent. Recycling, for example, of plastic. The main impediment of it not happening in New Zealand is the demand for the end product. Now, who among us knew that? I mean, obviously we need to reduce the amount of plastic, and we are all on board with that, or most of us are. But there are some plastics that are fairly easily recyclable, provided that people are quite aware that they should be choosing those products. Yeah, and this is where we could make a difference by joining forces in an education campaign, in an information campaign, because it's a very complicated world, and most of us just do not know where we can make a difference.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I always love the quote, we're drowning in information but starving for wisdom. It's a theme that's running through the whole project, is how do we pull these ideas together and really make sense of them. And there's quite a specific question here, and there's a little bit of license in it, I think, to address some of the topics that have been raised, but it's rate in the order of importance with respect to resilience where we should concentrate our resources: housing, trade, infrastructure.
Well, housing primarily, because if you haven't got somewhere to live, you can't do any of the other things anyway. So I'd say let's get our sort of housing and way of living taken care of. And
we were talking about it in the break, as in terms of picking up on a question that you asked earlier, Johnny, around how you encourage more of this kind of business growth in the provinces, I guess. And housing is, both Jane and I find housing is a really real impediment to actually bringing people into the region to fill the roles that we have. You get so far through a really promising recruitment and they just literally can't actually find anywhere to live. It's pretty fundamental.
Can't pay lip service to talking about ecosystems or circular things and then try to be linear. The reality is, I don't know how trade fits, easy into this, but housing and infrastructure, how do you separate the two? Yeah. And, you need to actually, yes, you need to do, whatever you do in housing, you have to have mirror approach in infrastructure and vice versa. So you kind of separate those at your peril.
Yeah, and it's a really good point, and I think you've spoken a lot about it, Agnieszka, in terms of connecting up the thinking and not making all these decisions in isolation, which is kind of the current state and part of what we're trying to address. We're running out of time, but I want to give you all the opportunity to really share based on this conversation and some of the questions that have come through and the mood that's being expressed, I guess, if there's something that you could change in Te Tauihu right now, something you'd like to see happen or a big idea you'd like to see come to fruition, what would that be? What's something you'd like to share with the audience? And I'll give you all the opportunity to do that. I'm looking at you, Lisa.
Oh, you are again. I guess just coming back to that theme of a more courageous kind of approach to how we're using our resources. So I think it's so, like, we know we have all these massive issues, and it's so necessary to focus on addressing those. But I think through a kind of positive and creative approach to what is possible is really, I guess leading a large team of people, you see as like people, and also communicating to the wider public, I guess, as we do all the time through, to our customer base and whatnot. It's like people's capacity for having difficult conversations is great. I think if you're coming from the heart, and if you're being authentic, and if you know who you are and where you're coming from, then actually people's capacity to take on something that's not simple, that's not easy and palatable, is much greater than we, and I guess by that we I mean business community in particular, than we think it is. I think there's and if you can harness that power, like if you can get that cut through with a team of people, 100 or 200 people, if you can get that, or a much smaller group, no doubt, if you can get people aligned behind a vision and build that trust, then you can achieve so much more than you imagine that you can. And it sounds like a cliche, but I kind of want to end on that note, because I actually, for all of these problems and issues that we may face as a business, that we face as a community and as a region, like I actually feel more than ever that those challenges throw down the gauntlet to us to be so clear about who we are and what we do, why we do it, and to create real value in the world. And I think growth upon growth upon growth just happens. Not only do you not have the time to consider these things in a scrupulous way, you don't have the incentive to do it either, but when we know that's not the world that we're living in, we have to make the time, and we really, really have the incentive. And I think when you can pull people together on that, it's actually a hugely uplifting and exciting and inspiring moment. That's my...
Agnieszka?
Just one, eh? I think that because of that restriction, I would just stick to where we can make the biggest difference. I think that most immediately we can make the biggest difference in demanding that anything that big resources are being spent in the region, that we have a say on, that they hit several goals, that they address climate change, that they address the concerns we all are feeling about, for instance, well-being of people living here. And that includes things on the forefront of everybody's mind, such as mental health, and that it is wearing the ancestors' hat. We can keep asking those questions. I had an interesting conversation about whether it's important to declare a climate emergency or not. There are many arguments for and against, but the main thing that those who are proponents of it say, well, that gives you a platform of questioning. Okay, you're proposing this project, how does it address the climate emergency? Similarly, we should ask that question, how is it not business as usual? Yeah. So how are you trying to break through the old silos through this project? How are you trying to make sure that we address our urgencies of deteriorating well-being. That's my one.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jane.
I would like to see our resilience being adaptability and to become open and adaptable as possible. I just think the word resilience, and I was just talking about this with Claire at the break, but the word resilience has a bit of a tendency to mean a wall, putting up, we're going to be strong against this. And I think we just need to be open and adaptable and ready for change and ready to work towards good outcomes and, take care of each other.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Jane. So that's a really good place to leave it, taking care of each other. Thank you very much to all the panellists tonight. It's not an easy job. It's a very broad-ranging conversation. There's a number of them underway, and we really appreciate you giving up your time to be here tonight and sharing some of those insights and kind of kicking off the conversation here for what's going to be an enduring journey around how we be more bold and more courageous. For those in the audience, in terms of future participation, we will get an email to you regarding the community hui to make sure that you can be involved in the next phase of that conversation as well. But also, if I know some of you have joined from outside the Bay, which is great, thank you to everyone who travelled tonight. But also, we've got a conversation next week in Richmond on courageous leadership. And interestingly, of all the topics we've circulated, it's courageous leadership that people have been very drawn to. So we have a really phenomenal lineup there next week in Richmond, which you'll be able to live stream through the Facebook page and the website as well. So I really encourage you to be a part of that. Just finally, I'd like to have a round of applause for our panellists and then let Miriana close. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for attending tonight, and the panellists, they were wonderful. And like Johnny said, it's not easy being up here. And those questions were pretty awesome, and also the responses. But tonight, I just really wanted to leave you with the conversations that we've been having around the regions, and especially about our relationship to the natural world, and how we're really wanting to centre the strategy around that. So how we've been talking about it has been in the context of the Māori worldview. And I really do need to thank Shay Wilson, who is actually in Nelson at the moment, but has been an advisor to Wakatu to support us with the development of our intergenerational outcomes and also other groups that we've been involved in. So I wanted to share with you the thinking around a concept that we use that is called taiao. And tai means the sea or land's horizon where heaven and earth meet. And ao is the world around and above us. Therefore, for the mahi, the kaupapa that we are convening, taiao means the environment that contains and surrounds humanity, and where humanity and the natural world sustain each other in an interconnected relationship of respect. So that is the whakaaro, that is our thinking in terms of the mahi that we're doing, and it was really important that we shared that with you. We're on a mission. We want to be good ancestors. We want to be good descendants, but we need to do that together as communities. So nō reira e te whānau, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, me inoe tātou. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, to ātawhai o tō tātou āriki a ihu karaiti, me te whiwhi tahitanga, me te wairua, āmeni. Kia ora.